Welcome to today's episode of Chronicles of Failure. I'm Kim Salbany, one of your hosts, and I will be joined by my co-host Seth Terbeek. But before we get started, a quick note. This episode contains discussions of suicide and gun violence, which may be difficult for some listeners. If you or someone you know needs support, please reach out to the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. They're available 24/7. So what do you do when you drop out of high school? Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Well, your parents may have told you that you'd be headed nowhere fast, but on today's episode, we've got a guest who turned that nowhere into, well, somewhere pretty incredible. Society, funny enough, expects us to succeed through grief even when it's society itself that sets us up for failure by expecting us to go unaffected in these situations, to just get back on the horse without providing us with space or accessible support to do that. Our guest today defied those odds. And not only did she graduate, but she continued on through higher education and became software's go-to revenue hunter to inform unbelievable revenue gains in companies that they didn't even know that the revenue existed in certain places. So our Chronicles of Failure episode 3 is Failure to Grieve, a success story. Confused? Let's dig in. Picture this. It's the 1980s in Canada. Suicide and guns, they were bad words. Gun violence and suicides, they both happened, of course, but they weren't spoken of, not in the open. So when a young woman is impacted in a personal way by both, what does she do? Well, does she just go back to school and continue to have boy talk, go to prom? No, it's not that simple. Obviously, we know that now. We know support is crucial. So is addressing the loss, talking about it. As a society, we've come a long way since the 80s, and we understand now trauma can be the result of losing a close family member. According to a study published in 2022 conducted by the Center of Crisis Psychology in Denmark, death in the family from suicide or accidents were significantly more associated with reduced completion of education. The reasons behind it, well, they're complicated, but we know that support systems matter now. And well, we can't support what we don't talk about. Adults aren't strangers to loss either, with grief having a profound impact on employees' productivity and well-being. From struggling to meet deadlines while mourning a loved one to navigating the delicate balance of personal and professional life, grief affects us all. So what do we do when something as imminent as grief causes us to fail? Or, well, at least feel like we're failing. Is it possible that grief can inspire both failure and success? I think that question begs a whole host of psychological analysis that, frankly, I am not qualified to speak to, but what I can say after hearing today's guest's story, it certainly can. Given the perfect storm of cultural, familial, and social support, it can. My co-host, Seth Terbeek, explores this topic with our extraordinary guest, Anita Toth, who candidly chronicles her journey of overcoming grief and, subsequently, failure on her path to success. Anita is a hidden revenue hunter at our company, Hidden Revenue Hunters, and has an impressive career in customer success and higher education. Her company, Hidden Revenue Hunters, helps other companies generate revenue strategies within their existing customer base. Her failure is delicate, and her story is her own, and so I will let her chronicle the whole thing herself. Enjoy.
So my big failure is that I dropped out of high school. Now, you might know me on LinkedIn. Maybe you don't. You can pop over there and see what I've done. I spent, as you said, Seth, like 14 years in higher education. I have a master's degree. So when you look at sort of my public profile, it's like it doesn't quite jibe with what you think, that I dropped out of high school. And not only did I drop out of high school once, I dropped out 3 times.
Wow.
Before I got everything together and decided, like, which way is my life going to go? So happy to discuss how I came to the decision to drop out of high school. Let me tell you, first of all, it was not very popular with my family or my friends, but it was something that if I didn't do that, I'm positive I wouldn't be alive today.
Yeah, that's really Really appreciate you sharing that, Anita. I think that is a really great, failure story to share. And I'm sure that there are other folks in similar situations that are really going to benefit from this. So that's really
Mm.
exciting from that side of things. So yeah, I think just one question is, how did you manage your feelings through that? You talk about mental health, and so like making that decision must have been really hard. So how did you do that?
So I'm going to again set context, and maybe before talking about my feelings, what led up to it,
Yeah.
because it's not just one day you wake up and you're like, I'm going to quit high school because I don't know, I have nothing else to do. It was something that I was in my final year of high school. I should say this. And we were, I don't know why, it's an archaic system. We were not on semesters, we were on terms. So you had 3 terms and you took the same courses, 8 of them, all year long. So I ended up dropping out late March. That meant that I lost my whole year, because if it had been semester system, I would have at least had 4 courses, half the year completed. But because we were on this term system, I was facing having to do my final year of high school at the time when everybody's applying for, to go to college and university. I'm facing like, wow, like now I'm gonna have to redo this whole year. So I had 2 circumstances that led up to why my mental health was so poor, that I needed to make this decision literally to save my life. And what had happened about a year and a half earlier is I had 2 of my friends die. On the same night, within 5 minutes of me leaving a party I was at. Now, this is not a raucous party. This was just really quiet, 10 of us together, hanging out, celebrating one of our friends going off to university. He got accepted. And there had been some issues with one of our friends. Again, we didn't recognize the sign of somebody who might be suicidal. And long story short, he went downstairs, found a rifle, loaded it. His best friend went down with him. They were arguing over the gun, and the gun discharged, killing one of them. And the other friend sat down and put the barrel under his chin and pulled the trigger.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. It was, and I just left 5 minutes earlier. It was just so chaotic. Again, being Canadian in the 80s, we didn't have, a lot of access to guns, and you didn't talk about suicide. So I didn't know how to deal with this. And then 2 in one night, right? It was just, I was 17 years old. It was so difficult. And the best, this is the treatment we got, or support we got. The funeral home sat us down and talked to us for an hour. And that was it.
My.
We were meant to go on with our lives. So I had that event when I was 17. And then a year, 1 month, and 2 weeks later, my uncle took a shotgun and he blew his head off. So I hadn't dealt with my friends' deaths. I had just kind of pieced myself back together. And then my uncle would go and do this. And again, like, suicide by gun was so unheard of that I didn't have anybody to talk to. And then I'm 18, 17 when the first event happened, 18 when the other event happened. And of course, my mental health went just downhill. So my uncle died in October. The end of March is when I made the decision to quit school, because I wasn't coping. There wasn't anyone to talk to. I didn't know how to process my feelings. 17, 18 years old, you're still kind of figuring this stuff out. Absolutely. Right? So I did what I thought best. And, I just tried to survive, I think, is the best way to put it. And all of us will have periods of time in our lives where you are literally on survival mode. It might be very short or it might be long. Mine happened to be from October to March. So many months of suffering, struggling. Then you have the added pressure. It's my final year of high school. My marks are dropping because I have no interest. I would say, looking back now, that I was definitely depressed. I was grieving.
Mhm.
And, a focus on school wasn't important. I'd been on the honor list until that point, and I just couldn't cope. So, yeah, I have all these emotions. I have the pressure of my last year of high school, and now my grades are dropping because I couldn't focus. And so with that, it just became this downward spiral.
Yeah. Okay. So you're having all these feelings, emotions of just all these events that have occurred that are incredibly difficult to manage. You don't have support. And so you arrive at this decision because you feel like you don't have any other avenue to go. Is that kind of where your head was at that time?
So my head was at the time that maybe it would be easier to just join them. That's where I was at.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was literally, I was making a decision. Dropping out of high school was literally making a choice to live. Or if I kept going, I knew things would just get worse and I would likely make the same decision they did. That's where I stood at the end of March that year. And obviously, you know which direction I took, but that meant dropping out of high school. I went to an inpatient center where they helped me. I lived there for several months to, help me just cope, get through, talk, process these feelings. And that's what ended up, I would say, is saving my life.
That's a really brave decision, Anita. So
Yeah.
that's, amazing. I'm glad you're here today.
Yeah.
That you've made that decision. So that's really
Can I
awesome.
say something though, Seth?
Please do. Yes.
Um, there was immense pressure from my family, my parents especially. My aunt sent me a card when she found out that I was dropping out, about how disappointed she was with me. What a failure I was going to be. I was setting myself up for a horrible life. Like, this wasn't I just sat down and then made the decision. I had immense pressure not to do this. And this is where, when we talk about failures and stuff, there's a part of this that is gut feeling. And I knew that if I listened to them and followed what they wanted me to do, that I wasn't going to make it. I knew that, right? Because I'd already kind of made a decision. My birthday is the end of May. It was the end of March. And I knew I wasn't going to see that birthday. I wasn't going to see 19. I knew it.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest part was not deciding. It was deciding to listen to myself instead of listening to what others wanted. Because they had reduced it down to, well, if I drop out of high school, yeah, okay, I've got to do the whole year again, whatever. But the bigger thing is that they set me on this track. Once you become a high school dropout, this is going to happen. You're never going to amount to anything in your life, blah, 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 right? Like, they had set my whole path in their minds. And it turned out that wasn't true.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right? So, and you've been able to, you took that and were able to leverage that decision, that really hard decision to drop out amidst all of this pressure, and translate that to get some help for yourself that, clearly the people in your life were giving you at that time, right, which really enabled you to kind of move forward. So as you got that help, how did that, change your direction that you were going? Like, what did that do for you as you were, processing all of these intense and immense emotions to change your trajectory?
I think the biggest thing is first of all, it wasn't easy. Okay. Like, having to grieve properly with support is still painful. It doesn't matter whether you have support or you don't have support. Grieving is really painful. And our society does a terrible job of supporting people in grief. It is not, a month and you're fine. Yeah, maybe you can go back to work and stuff, but really it's 12 months, because every anniversary, every celebration, it just brings that back up. So what it did was it allowed me to, I guess, stabilize my day-to-day without the external pressures of things like school and parental influence and all of that, to be able to then start the very, very painful work of looking inward and feeling those very, very painful feelings, so that I could then be well enough to go back into the world and deal with all the additional pressures while I still continued to grieve.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, that you were having to do, and it's a long process. So recovery isn't a switch, right?
Nope.
And it might even be more than a year, right? It takes all this time, as like there's triggers or there's other things that come up that you have to deal with in that moment after you've done some of that initial work even.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got it. Exactly.
That's really a hard journey you've been through. And so really cool to see, where you're here now. And so you talked about dropping out 3 times. So you dropped out this one time. So how did this recovery work and then fold back into going into high school and dropping out again?
So I ended up that I moved cities. And I decided like, okay, well, I'm going to move cities. I'm going to try this last year of high school. I was young enough then that, I could still do it, because we were 5 years of high school at the time. Yeah. Now it's 4 years, but back then it was 5 years. And so, I ended up moving cities, and I started in this new high school, and I decided to go from a public high school to a Catholic high school. I have no idea why. Catholic high schools where I live are publicly funded, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's whatever. Way back in the Canadian Charter of Bill and Rights or Constitution, whatever we have. Anyway, they also get money, public money. Just the Catholic, though. Just the Catholic ones.
Amazing.
It was a different time in the 1880s or 1850s. Sorry. So I went for 2 weeks, and then it was just, again, too much for me. It was too much change. And September, so my friends died on the Labor Day weekend, which is in early September.
Yep.
And of course, the 2-year anniversary had just passed for them. The anniversary of my uncle's death, 1 year coming in up October. And then I moved cities, and then a different school board and all. It was just way too much. So I lasted 2 weeks, and then I just couldn't handle it anymore. So same thing. I ended up dropping out. I'll be honest, I can't even remember what I did in those months afterwards. I have no clue. But I ended up trying school again in February, because now we're in semesters. In February, went to school again, went to a downtown school. I thought that would be better. Didn't fit in, didn't feel comfortable. I don't know, maybe I lasted 1 week. I'm not even sure. But I dropped out a third time. And to say I wasn't concerned would be a lie, because now maybe what my family was telling me was true. I'm a failure. I dropped out once. I dropped out a second time. Now I've dropped out a third time. Like, is this going to be my life? Am I going to be, hanging out with people that are very different from me, just because I can't manage to succeed at finishing my last year of high school?
Yeah. There's a lot of talk of, not letting what people say bother you, right? And trying to push that aside, but it gets in there, it worms around in your brain, right? And so you start to mull that over and think about, okay, what's going to happen to me? Are they right? Are they wrong? And, that's a really hard to be in, especially if you don't have a support system with folks to bounce that off of, hey, I'm struggling with this. How do I work through that?
Yeah. Yeah. So by this point, we're tipping into the early 1990s. And again, like, it was still, you didn't really talk about suicide. Like, when my uncle died, I was to tell everybody he died of a heart attack.
Oh,
like, that's how much shame was around this. So I'm dealing with my own shame of, having my friends die and having my uncle die and not really being able to publicly talk about it because of my family's shame, especially with my uncle. Then I drop out of high school. Okay, that wasn't so bad, but now I've dropped out a second time. Now I've dropped out a third time. Now I'm starting to question, like, am I ever going to amount to anything? Maybe everybody's right. I'm just going to work a, whatever minimum wage job for life and just kind of, make my life that never really felt right. But the evidence, and this is the hard part, because the external evidence was proving that looked to be my path. But internally, I felt like, no, I'm going to turn this around. And I really fought with myself and obviously with my family, because now they're at this point of, just be honest, they were starting to give up. They were starting to just be like, you know what? It doesn't look like you're going to amount to much. Well, they'll still support me because they loved me. But they too didn't know what to do. Like, I think we were all like, there's no roadmap for a lot of this stuff. You have to figure it out as you go along. And so, it was a tough time. It was and then of course, when you're in those pits of despair, you or those valleys, you're like, am I ever going to get out? Is it ever going to change? Or what if this is the best that it ever gets? Can I live with this? Do I want to live with this?
Those are all really hard questions.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot to process while you're just trying to survive and figure out, what the next step even looks like.
Yeah.
So what did it look like for you to, take, hey, I've got these feelings, I'm in this situation, and make something of that? So what was that next step that you took to kind of move forward?
So I ended up getting professional help. So I'd gotten the professional help the first time. Like I said, right after I quit school, there was an inpatient and whatever. And I found, and bless her, she was so amazing. I found a grief group, and they're everywhere. Usually sounds strange, but it's true. They're associated with funeral homes because, actually it's the most logical place, but you wouldn't think of it. So, and they tend to have different types of groups. Like if somebody's died of cancer, they'll have that type of group. They'll have groups for parents who lost children, because even though it's grief, it's very different types of grief. And so I met this woman, her name was Lise. And unfortunately, the grief group didn't have anything around suicide. But Lise had discovered her father hanging in the closet.
Oh my.
And she worked with me voluntarily for 9 months, twice a week. Wow. To help me process the grief. She was just a personal volunteer based on her own experience with her dad. And she was the one that helped me work through the anger, helped me work through, I just left that party 5 minutes earlier. That 5 minutes, could I have done something? Because you start wondering, what could I have done? What could I have said? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I see this? And they torment you, those questions. Why didn't I? And she helped me process through all of that, and then realize that, well, no wonder I wasn't able to put my life back together when I had all of this, they call it survivor guilt.
Yes. Survivor
guilt, that I didn't do things. I was so hard on myself. And she helped essentially bring a little bit of compassion for myself. Because at that time it wasn't, I've dropped out of high school now 3 times. I'm feeling like all I did was heap on more of this dark, negative, heavy stuff on myself. And she helped slowly remove those layers so that I could start seeing that I did the best I could. How was I supposed to know when I left that party what was going to happen, right?
Exactly.
I had yes, I would have likely done something differently if I had known. So that's what she brought, was compassion. And up to that point, the sort of treatment approach hadn't addressed any of that. But she knew what it was like because of her lived experience. And that was incredibly powerful.
That's amazing. Yeah. And having someone who can help you process what's making you feel bad, and then also at the same time help you understand what's still good about you, because it can be really difficult in those moments to feel like there's any value, when you're at that point.
Yeah. And we've all been there.
Yeah.
We've all had those moments. Like my story, yeah, is a little on the extreme side, for sure. I'll admit it. But the feelings I had are the exact same feelings that other people will have. Like we all experience very difficult times where you question, should I even be doing this? Should I be here? Should I do something else? Like, am I even a good person? Like those, they all roll through your head.
Yep. So that's really amazing that you found that person. So bless Lise for all the help that she provided you. That's really amazing. I'm so glad that that's kind of where your story went. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So she helped you with that, work through those feelings, make some really great progress, it sounds like. And so, as you've kind of reflected on this, how has that, affected your career trajectory? So you're like, hey, I'm not going to have a career kind of thing. Where did that kind of send you?
Well, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here talking to you. My life would have taken an absolutely different path. So with her support and assistance, now I had moved away from home, like I said, to another city. There's, I don't know what the miles are, but it was about 700 kilometers. So what is that? 500 miles away?
Good guess. Yeah.
Enough that there was some separation from my family, which was important for me at that time. They had their own stuff going on. So Lise supported me as I applied to a different high school. I didn't go to the downtown school. I went to a school that I had to took me an hour to bus there every day on the city bus. And she advocated for me. And that was just the right environment for me to flourish. And that's exactly what happened. I ended up doing really well. Same thing, got on the honor roll, had really high marks again, and applied for university, got a full scholarship my first year. And then just continued to piece my life back together. And, she was only in my life about 8 or 9 months, long enough to help me get through the bulk of that really tough time and processing those feelings and my own thinking about myself. It wasn't just the feelings. It was, I had to change how I viewed myself and those situations. And, my ability moving forward to try to be compassionate toward myself. And so that's what really did it. And then once I got in that first year of university, I decided I wanted to move back closer to my family. So I applied to the University of Toronto, got won some awards. Now, I'd been in a small university, so it was quite easy to get a full scholarship, but applying to the University of Toronto at that time, it's something like 70,000 undergrad students. It's big. I mean, Toronto's a large city. And so the competition was quite fierce, but I ended up, winning awards there. I stayed there 4 years and managed to get a full scholarship for my master's at another university. And that's how I ended up just sort of on this path. Because I always wanted to. I loved learning. I loved, but I just lost my way. I just, stepped off the path, wandered into the deep, dark woods for a bit, and then needed a guide to help me get back because I really was lost.
That's really cool. That's, an inspiring and encouraging story. There's a lot of heartbreak and difficulty through that, but you were able to come out, and there's a lot of people that helped you along the way, which is really great. And I think that is a really important point. It's okay to fail and it's okay to need help. And so, getting that help is not a negative thing. It's an important process, that at different stages of our life, we all have to go through in order to take the next step.
Yeah. And anybody who says that they're self-made is full of crap. I'll just say it now. You're full of crap. You can't be self-made. Every interaction you have, whether you even buy a product, like somebody had to make that product. They had to conceive of it. So you didn't just do it 100% on your own. Right?
That's right.
The electricity we get, there are humans behind it providing it for us. So no, you didn't.
Yep.
And there has to be a level of humility in saying, no, I didn't do it alone. It was very hard in the beginning, especially with all that shame.
Yeah.
To ask for help and then to be honest about what really happened. Right? It was so challenging. But as I started receiving help and realizing the benefit of the help, two things happened. One is that I realized that it's okay to ask for help, and I learned to ask for help faster.
Mhm.
But the second is I was able to give back. So out of being open to receive help from others, it allowed me to then be there to serve others myself.
That's
And
really
I
cool.
think that's the most powerful piece. Out of this failure, I became somebody who was now able to say, hey, I've had hard times too, and I can support you through this.
That's
Maybe
really
you and I have very different experiences, but I know what it's like to be lost in those dark woods and just feeling absolutely alone. And I'm here to help guide you or support you or whatever the case may be. And it was then that I heard a saying, and it's always stood by me. People come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Lise came into my life for a reason. Just that period of time, right? Or you could call it a season. And then with some people, they stay a lifetime, but that's the ebb and flow of it, is that even as we help others, for some it will be for a season, for some it will just be for a very specific reason, and then for others it will be a lifetime.
That's really great. I love that breakdown of how people are in and out of your life, because it's true, right?
Yeah.
Just because you've got a relationship with someone now doesn't mean that it'll stay that way for forever. And that's okay, right? We can all take our different paths. Relationships can kind of increase and decrease over time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's perfectly,
Yeah.
a great way to go through it and help frame all that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really
I
cool.
love it. And I think it was around that time that I first heard it. It wasn't Lise who told me, it was somebody else. Another very powerful woman in my life that I met at that same time. Her name was Muriel. And she was the one that would always say that to me. And it was really helpful,
That's
really
really great.
helpful to frame everything.
That's cool. So you shared a couple learnings through this already. Is there any other thing that you would want to share for folks who are in this place, or of struggle or failure or suicide, whatever it is? And if you don't have anything, that's fine too. Just wanted to put that out there.
I mean, the biggest thing is my heart goes out, right? Like, really, the only way to get through the pain is to go through it. You shove it down, it's just going to come out in other ways. Life is painful. You have to have that contrast of the pain to understand love and joy and happiness, right? You have to have discontent in order to see peace. We must have night in order to have the day. I think that our society, again, we do a really poor job of, now it's better, I got to say, from the 80s when I was talking about all of this stuff till now, talking about mental health issues, there's more support, it's more publicly available. Like at that time, it was so hard to find any resources. Well, on the internet wasn't really around, it was still so new. So much has changed. But I think one thing, and I have two teenage girls, I try to let them know that, yes, life is just painful. That's just the way it is. And it's not just for humans. You can watch animals suffer as well as they go through their struggles. That is just the nature of life. And I think the more that we can accept that there's going to be these periods of difficulty and challenge, and periods can be months, maybe years, the more you can kind of lean into that and accept it and not fight it, it makes it actually easier to get through it, because that compassion piece can come in. You can start seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. So that would be the one thing that I would say. It's not easy. I'll tell you, like, it's not easy. Not easy getting to the place where you recognize the pain as just being part of the lived experience on this earth. Nobody likes it. Right?
It's a hard lesson to hear and learn. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like realizing that there's going to be pain and there's nothing you can do to stop that necessarily. It's just how you have to walk through it sometimes.
Yeah, you do. But there are ways that you can maybe not speed the process up, but make it, but have some bright moments within that. So things like gratitude help, serving others. Like, one of the best ways to get out of your own crap is to go and help somebody else. like honestly, and whatever that may be, right? It's just getting out. I think the biggest challenge with failure is that we become very self-centered and self-focused.
Definitely.
So the best way to get out of that is by serving others. Like I actually for a while there, Lise got me into, this was hard. This was so hard. I was so terrified. I went into jails.
To help people.
To help others because I was still a teenager. I was 19. And well, let's just say when I was going through some dark times, some of the people I hung out with ended up in those places. Okay, we'll just leave it there. But she had me go into these jails. And they were young offenders facilities. I even went into maximum security ones. Wow. where they had murdered. They had done all sorts of things. Like we had guards in the room because these were dangerous criminals. And I went in and I talked to them about what my experience was like and some of the decisions I made. And maybe I could make somebody's day a little better. And, they would sit there in the beginning with their arms crossed, looking at like just pure whatever hatred toward me. And then it was interesting because I didn't come to preach. I didn't come to convert. I didn't come to change. I simply came to tell my story and maybe they could find hope. And it would be interesting because you could see them relax. The arms would become unfolded. Now they are in a jail. They still have to protect themselves. So they wouldn't share too openly, but they would start opening up and sharing about maybe some of the decisions they made that landed them there. And that was terrifying sitting, and they were mostly male convicts. They weren't female. So as a young 19-year-old sitting in, this room with armed guards with, some of the they were criminals who also really struggled. There's still humanity in them despite the choices they made that led them to where they were. But that was some of the most toughest service. But I'll tell you, when I was there and focusing on them and sharing, it was not all about me. Ironically, I wasn't stuck in my own head.
Yeah.
So service. Yeah.
I think that's really good. The ability to stop the mental processing all the time, right? And so that gives you something external to focus on instead of the things that are going on in your own head.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been a wild ride, I got to say. It has been absolutely wild. And now that I'm old enough, I can talk about it. Like if this had been 20 years ago, I wouldn't have had the ability. I'm now in my 50s. It just doesn't matter. It was so long ago and now I can open up and share about it and hope that it can help someone else. But really, life is painful. Pain's always going to come. It's what you choose to do with it. And ignoring it doesn't help. At some point, you got to go through it. But one way that you can help make it feel less painful at times is to serve others and get out of your own head.
That was Anita Toth of ATI. You can find her on LinkedIn, where she's always posting extremely interesting content. And, well, she's hunting revenue with B2B SaaS companies, so you can see how she deploys various retention strategies. Please give her a follow. And thank you, as always, for listening today. And follow us on Chronicles of Failure on TikTok and Instagram. And subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts today. Want to be a guest? Reach out at chroniclesoffailure.com. Thank you.